Welcome back to another episode of the Production Talk podcast. At the beginning of this episode, as always, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the country that we are recording this interview on today, the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, and I would like to express my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. With me today is Mr. Thomas Garnett of 301 Studios in Sydney. Tom is a long-term staff engineer, and he recently was mentioned as the mix engineer on Barker's ARIA Award-nominated song. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I had a listen to the song and it sounded fantastic. Tom, it's been a long time. We've crossed paths, I want to say 6 to 8 years ago in the Northern Rivers. And then we just ran into each other a couple of weeks ago at Studio 301's Producers and Engineers Barbecue, which was part of the ARIA Week.
Yep.
And it was really great to meet you. So I'm just dying to find out what has happened in the meantime. So maybe just want to start with the beginning of your career. Talk me through the milestones and tell me what you're doing now.
Oh, wow. Such a big question.
Start at the beginning.
Yeah, well, I guess like most engineers, I was a musician, or I wanted to be a musician. And I left school and wanted to get some gigs. And me and my buddy who I played with, we couldn't get any gigs because we asked to play places and they said, we want to hear what you sound like. And we were like, how do we do that? And then so we figured out you have to go to a recording studio, and then we figured out that was too expensive. So I decided, well, it can't be that hard. I'm just going to do it myself. So I bought it was before I figured out DAWs and computers, and I bought like a Boss recording system that had like 8 channels or something. And I started making demos, and I really thought that was fun. And before I knew it, I was enrolled at SAE Byron Bay, and I didn't go to class very much, but I booked the studios more than probably anybody there. So, and then, which was really handy because after I finished my degree, I applied for internships to pretty much every studio, including Studios 301, who I didn't get a call back from. But I got an internship at another studio, which ended up being really cool and probably in some ways a lot better because it was the old 301 Castlereagh Street. So the original 301 Castlereagh Street at 301 Castlereagh Street, which was called Rec Studios. And the two guys there were legends and they're good friends of mine. And it wasn't like run like 301. It was sort of there was a studio of musicians run by musicians and a little bit more ad hoc, a little bit more crazy, but it was in the city. So anytime big artists would book and they didn't want to get a cab to 301, they would come to this studio. So I got to work with some really big name clients really straight away. And I mean, actually one interesting thing was almost a classic story. My first day of interning, I got there. I was really nervous and scared. I grabbed the vacuum because I was like, I'm going to be cleaning. I'm going to be scrubbing toilets. And the guy, the owner and one of the head engineers said, hey, what are you doing? You don't have to do that. I need your help. And it just happened that their engineer left that day for some reason. I'm not sure if there was a miscommunication and there was no engineer on the session, and they had an SSL console and Pro Tools.
Yeah, right.
And the studio owner, Ross, was playing drums on the session, and then the artist was playing guitar and singing, and they didn't have anyone to run. He was like, can you run tools? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. He's like, can you use the SSL? I was like, yeah, I can do that. And I ran the session, and then, I mean, there was a bunch of other interns there. Some of them had been there a lot longer than me, but it instantly catapulted me to sort of the favorite position, I think. Well, I like to think so, but...
Wow.
So...
okay. Yeah. Did you have any experience on SSLs before? Because they're not easy consoles to operate.
Yeah, so luckily at SAE Byron, they had the SSL-G when I was there and the SSL-K, so I was pretty across it. And they had an SSL-E series at Rec Studios.
Yeah, which is very similar to the G.
Yeah, so it was like being back at school.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, that's really good. And about what year was that? How long ago?
That was in 2014, I think was when I started at that studio. So literally January, I remember the new year started and I moved to Sydney. I was from the Gold Coast. I moved to Sydney to do this internship, and I took all my stuff and just moved down there. I didn't have many friends, or I just wanted to work, and I had no plan B. I was just, I'm going to become a studio engineer.
Wow.
And yeah, that's kind of how I started. I also had another gig at another studio called Albert's, which was like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I had my band had recorded there, and I sort of was like the assistant there for a bit as well with another guy, and did a lot of cool stuff there as well, including tape transfers and a lot of cool sessions. And so I was really lucky. I mean, you have to make your own luck. I kind of made my own luck, but when I got those opportunities, I was well prepared and I worked really hard.
And you were ready.
So I wasn't going out and socializing too much. I was just coming to the studio every single day, whether it was my intern shift or not, and trying to be helpful and I'd clean the floors and do whatever, or if they needed help on sessions, I would help them. And I think that made a big difference, because some people do internships and they just want to play their beats on the speakers, and they don't care about what the patch bay does and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of how I got my foot in the door.
Okay. And how did you move from being an assistant to being actual staff engineer? How long did it take you to take on this title?
Probably about a year, I think. I mean, that's
quick.
Yeah, it was quick, because I mean, at 301 it would probably take a bit longer and probably be harder. But at this studio, because the two guys who ran it were musicians and they had other interests, like one of them is an artist manager and Ross is a drummer, and they didn't want to do the engineering at the studio so much, and they kind of got a little bit sick of it. So they would start passing me the gigs they didn't want to do. And before long,
I see,
those gigs just got bigger and bigger, and they wanted to do less and less. And I was the most capable of the interns, because they had a bunch of other interns, but they weren't trusted to run sessions, and I'd been in positions where I'd proven that I could do it. And so they just started giving me more and more sessions, and then it wasn't like officially like, hey, you're an engineer now. It was just kind of, I was just doing sessions, and
it happened. Yeah.
And it just kind of happened like that.
And for how long were you there?
I was at Rec for 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
I was also working at Albert's, but Albert's closed down. And then Rec, it got to the point at Rec where I got busy with my own stuff, because I'd been doing so many things, and I got my own room in the same complex, and I just didn't want to do everyone who came through the door anymore. I was getting a little burnt out, to be honest. I worked so much, and it was invaluable experience. Like I literally, working there for 3 years was like working in another studio for 6. I always tell other people, because
yeah, right.
Those guys didn't have the budget to fix stuff. It was an old building. It was the old 301, and before that was Capitol. So all the wiring was old. The console was breaking and didn't work very well, and they just didn't have the budget to fix it. We had techs come in, and so just getting things to work there sometimes was a real challenge. And sometimes we'd have big bands with like 11 people, I remember, and there'd be an engineer that came from Melbourne, and it was like I had to get everything to work, and it was a real challenge. And you do 14 to 16 hour days or more sometimes, and if you do enough of those in a week over and over, and you just get burnt out. And eventually I was a little bit burnt out, and I didn't want to do there was kind of too much work there for one engineer, but not enough for 2.
I see.
So
yeah.
we couldn't get somebody else to come and fill in. So eventually I kind of passed the torch to one of the other guys who used to assist me, and who then ended up becoming a 301 engineer as well. And then unfortunately Rec closed down because they sold the building. So those guys did really well to run a really cool facility for so long and keep carrying the torch of that building. I don't know if anyone listening knows, but the original 301 was at 301 Castlereagh Street, where this studio Rec was, and it was I think it was Capitol or EMI, and like David Bowie did an album there, and heaps of famous from the 60s and 70s, heaps of people recorded there. Like, it's unbelievable. So it was a real honor to be able to work in that building. So I'm really grateful that I got a shot there. And
yeah, nice. That's a piece of history.
Yeah. A piece of history.
Lovely. Yeah, cool. And tell us about the next steps of your career.
Well, then next I had my room down the hall, and I was just doing lots of mixing, and that's kind of when I really fell in love with mixing. And, I'd record someone and do the mix, and people just started booking me for mixing. And I was sending all of my mixes to 301 for mastering. And I think I sent 20 or something songs in a month. And they were like, who's this Tom guy? We should meet him. So a few of the 301 team called me up and said, let's have some beers. And they came over and we got really drunk, and I got to know them. And then really, luckily for me, a few of the mastering engineers at 301, like Steve Smart and Andrew Edson, they they put in a good word for me to Ron, who runs 301, and they said, you need to get Tom, like, he's really good. And I mean, I don't know why they think that.
Oh, you earned that.
And Ron, he hit me up and said, do you want to come and do some stuff for us? And I said yes. And there was just at the time when 301 was changing the building to the new facility, and I think they'd had some stuff, a big move, and they'd lost some staff because of the close down, and when they were opening back up, they needed staff back, and some of those old staff had moved on to other places. So there was luckily just I was in the right place at the right time, and I showed up, and they needed people to test the consoles. So they were like, hey, do you know how to use the Neve? And I didn't, but I said yes, because we need to test every single channel and every single pot, because they'd reinstalled it, and we need to, because it had been in storage for a year. So I got paid to test the console, and at the same time, I taught myself how to use that console, so that the first session that was booked there, I was on the session, and it was a big producer from America had come to produce an artist there, and I was the sort of engineer, and I had just learned that console literally the days before, testing all the pots and figuring it all out and reading the manual and asking questions to people. So I kind of snuck my way in.
Nice.
And then they have an SSL there as well, which I also knew how to use. And
yeah.
So then once I did those sessions, I was kind of part of the team.
Wow. Fantastic.
And it's pretty rare, because usually you have to intern, and I kind of I did my time somewhere else, but it's funny because I did apply there and they didn't accept me, and now I came back as an engineer. So
you played that well. Good on you. Good on you.
I took the long road.
Yeah. Okay. And what's a week like for a staff engineer at 301? How does it start? How many days do you work? How long are your days? What do you do all day?
Well, I guess the week doesn't really start or end, because at a place like 301, it's pretty much open 24/7. So and I got a quick reputation for doing the late hip hop sessions. It kind of was that was like my niche. Other guys did rock and jazz, and Simon does the vocals, and I sort of found my niche as like the hip hop engineer. And I did a lot of a lot of people don't want to do the international hip hop sessions because they're a real punish. These guys are often really rude. They come in really late at night. They work a really long time. It's crowded. It's noisy. They have the volume to 11.
Oh, gee.
So I did a bunch of those, and I guess like sometimes those you'll start at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and you'll still be going at 8 a.m. the next morning, sometimes longer.
Wow.
So, and they might have booked 3 days in a row. So you go have a sleep, wake up, come back, do it again. And that's usually on the weekend. So there's no real Monday to Friday, for me at least. Some people manage to work themselves a good schedule, but I've always been down for anything. And if it's a good session, I don't care what time it is. If we're making cool music and it's something that I think is going to be exciting, I'll go whenever. So I don't have any kids, and so I don't have to.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
So that's also another reason I got to do those things. So.
Yeah. Look, you mentioned earlier that early in your career you got a bit burned out. It sounds like that could be a recipe for burnout again. How are you managing your strength these days? How do you self-monitor? When do you know that it's time to have a break? And how do you recharge your batteries?
Well, that's a really good question. I was probably getting pretty burnt out from those sessions, and I haven't done those for a while. I mean, COVID was a natural break, because the studios all had to close pretty much. And even though we could go in, we were all isolated. There wasn't, as you know, there was no sessions for nearly 2 or 3 years, and definitely no international sessions. And so that was kind of a natural break. Otherwise, by now, I definitely would be, I think, pretty burnt out. But I think you just have to take breaks and just not do those all the time. You can't do those forever.
Yeah, of course.
That's why I've always thought, like, I was young. I came into engineering quite young, and I sort of climbed the ladder pretty quickly. So I'm 33 now, but when I started at 301, I was in my 20s still, and I still had the time and the energy and the freedom to be able to do those things. So my goal was to make the most of it and sort of make a name for myself, if you will, while I had those freedoms. So I think that's really important, because obviously as you grow older,
smart move,
and you have a family, your priorities will change, and you don't want to do those things anymore. So
yes.
I've put all my hours in. Yeah, I've put in a lot of hours, like, and now I've actually noticed the last year I'm way more selective. I'm a bit grumpy if I have to do something like that. Like, I think twice about it, whereas I used to be like, I don't care what time it is, book it, I'll do it. Whereas now I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. So I think
fair enough.
Make the most of it while you've got the legs.
Yeah, cool. Excellent.
Because you will get over it, I think.
So how does it work? You just, come in, power up the studio in the morning, is the client, do they come in a bit later? Do you set up, have you got help to set up microphones? Do you do a lot of sessions with many inputs, or you set hip hop, so that's often just a single microphone?
Okay, yeah.
How complex are those sessions?
Yeah, it really depends on the session, obviously. I guess I'll just talk about, like, if you're doing an international hip hop star or a pop star, because, a lot of people know how bands record, but maybe not everyone knows what you do when someone kind of famous comes in. Most of the work is done actually preparing the room with catering and sort of things that they will want to eat. And obviously I don't have to do that, but we have a lot of staff at 301. So there'll be like a engineer, which is usually me or whoever, and then they'll have an assistant. And then there might be a couple other staff just to help with like runners, basically, because the bigger international acts, they don't come alone. They come with a group of people. They usually have security guards. They have friends that they've known their whole life. They have their managers. They have all sorts of people in a circus following them around. And those people ask you for things like they are the artist, and you can't really say no to them either. So you need to have, if you're the engineer and you're by yourself, you don't want them asking you to go get them some salmon at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're trying to record the vocal.
Yeah.
So you need, like, the support staff is really important. And at 301, that's what they do really well. And that's why 301 does a lot of international, like a lot of famous people come to 301, is because they have the capacity to run those sessions. But yeah, I guess for something like that, it seems like it's just a vocal, but actually we go pretty in depth. So I've learned from having a lot of experience doing this. I set up a microphone in the control room because sometimes they want to do it in the control room.
Oh yeah.
I set up a microphone in the live room because they might want to do something in the live room. And there's no time to, when they say I want to record, it's now. It's not like, hey, give me a second while I set up another mic. Otherwise they're going to be upset.
Yeah.
So everything needs to be done before they get there.
Yeah.
So usually we come in.
I see.
Yeah, we'll just set the mic up, set those both mics up. We'll set up auxiliary cables. So I usually put several auxiliary cables all around the studio. So in case they have multiple producers or friends who want to play songs, sometimes they pass phones around and that person's like, hey, can I play the song? And he's further away. So I'll have an auxiliary at the desk. So in case the artist is sitting there and wants to plug their laptop in and play a beat or play a song they're working on, I'll have a long cable running to the couches And so if someone's sitting back there and they want to play a song, and then all these things are just either on channels on the console or they're on externals. Actually, I usually put them on channels, I learned, because in case they say, hey, can you just record that? And I'll just sing over the top of it, even though it's rough and it's come over the laptop. If it's on an external on the console, it's much harder to record. If you just put it on a line input, I can flick that into Pro Tools and I can just grab that chorus or something, and then they can immediately just rap over it or sing over it.
Nice. Good thinking. Yeah.
And these are things I've learned from making mistakes. Like I've done things where I didn't have any of that stuff set up and I got yelled at and I felt like a real idiot. So but luckily by the time I got to 3.1, I'd already learned all these hard lessons and I was well prepared. So I think I did help a lot of people at 3.1 learn that stuff.
Fantastic. Wow. That's some great experience.
Yeah. Yeah. We usually try to keep the same mics as well. So if they change where they are if they're in the control room or if they're in the live room, it's the same mic, and obviously put headphones in both places, copy the settings, things like that. Just make it easy for them. So no matter where they go, it's easy. Like you want to record here, it's done. You want to record there, it's done.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. So, and if somebody wants to record in the control room, you just turn the speakers off and put headphones on, or do you run the speakers quietly?
That's up to them. But I would personally try to turn the speakers off. But usually there's 15 people in the control room having a party and talking.
Yeah, right.
So, but with that, usually with hip hop, recording quality is, I mean, I don't want to say for everyone, but a lot of times is not the priority. So
yeah, it's about the vibe.
I try to build a baffle or something in there, and and just I will tell people to be quiet if I think it's appropriate. But
does that affect your choice of microphone? Knowing that there are many people around, would you then consider maybe a dynamic microphone or something that picks up less detail?
No. Usually you got to use the best mics you got, because these people are pretty cluey. Like they've recorded in good studios before.
Yeah, right.
If you put a 57 up, they're going to be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Where's the ELAM? Where's the 87? Like they know what these, they don't necessarily know what they are, but they know what they look like. And they'll be like, what's that? That's not what I usually am used to.
Yeah.
And they'll hear it too. Right. So,
okay.
like obviously I go for the best mic we have. So makes your job easier.
Yeah, nice. So you just mentioned the Neumann U87. Obviously, that's a very prestigious microphone. That's, I guess, known as the all-rounder. You find it in many studios. But the ELAM, is that the 251? That's the
251,
yeah, right.
That's a real great mic.
Yeah, and it's rare, and it's extremely expensive, isn't it?
Extremely expensive.
Yeah.
But oftentimes people, they expect that. They won't.
Yeah.
So we have to rent if we don't have it. I mean, at 301, we have a ELAM 251, but we didn't for a long time, and we were renting it so often from another place that we eventually got one.
Yeah, right.
We had to, because people were they just expect it. Same with the Sony C800. We don't have one at 301, but it's 50% of the time they ask for an ELAM, and the other 50% of the time they ask for a Sony C800.
Yeah, right.
So
okay.
And that's also equally as expensive and even brighter, which is almost impossible because the ELAM is very bright too. But it is a very beautiful mic. Sounds amazing.
Does that cause trouble with sibilance?
I think it's dependent on the singer, who you're recording. Because those mics are bright, but you're usually going to make a mic that's not that brighter anyway. So it's going to bring up the sibilance. So if you use an 87, it's not as bright, but you're probably going to boost some top end. And so then if some singers are sibilant and they there's nothing you can do about it, you just got to pull it down. So
yeah, I see. And do you apply any processing to tape?
I'm not a big processor. I'll filter things on a microphone if there's a microphone filter. But there's too many variables in sessions like that. They don't want you to be fiddling with stuff. They want to start recording literally yesterday. So if you're fiddling with the attack and the release times in 1176 and saying, hey, can you just do one more take? They're not going to be happy. They just want to start recording. So,
got it.
I prefer for the client to just be super happy and not for me to, be nerding out on compressor times. if you're working with someone who's a friend or a client that you're really comfortable with, then I'm more happy to experiment. But if it's someone I'm not sure about or I don't know, or I skip. And also, there's less noise and less potential issues. If you have, the more things you patch in, the more problems you can have too.
Yes,
and
of course.
Big studios like 301, every studio in the world, you can have glitches and bugs and problems with gear. So some of these sessions are really high pressure and there's a lot of expectation. So you want the smoothest and easiest way forward, because if you make, engineers can't make mistakes. If you make a mistake, you're done. There's no forgiving. I don't know why. We don't get a lot of forgiveness with mistakes. So it's like, do your job, and if you do your job really well, you won't get a pat on the back. It's just you won't get in trouble. So that's the compliment. So yeah, I try to skip stuff, and oftentimes, you don't want to risk. If you don't know someone who you're recording, I don't want to stick in 1176 because you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know what's going to come out of their mouth. They could be whispering and then start screaming, and then you're just going to distort the compressor, or just really crush the vocal. And yeah, I don't want to risk that. So
fair enough.
I'm a little bit conservative. Other people are different, but that's just my approach. It's just a simple, trouble-free, get it clean, and you can always run it back through stuff later if you really want to.
And do you find that there's a difference in, shall we call it attitude maybe, between, the high-end clients and sort of like beginners or locals? Do you get more attitude from the high-end clients, or what's the difference in flow if you work with smaller acts or larger acts?
Yeah, I mean, I think attitude is probably an individual thing, but there's definitely extra pressure that comes when you are working with someone who's really well known. It's pressure on you, not just like you. I put pressure on myself, as everyone probably does, to do well. But you're worried about what this person's thinking of you. You're also worrying about the studio. Like if you don't do a good job, you're letting other people down, not just yourself. They'll think bad about where you're working. So, and there's also usually a lot of other people in the room. And I've been fired from sessions from people who are quite famous, once or twice, and it sucks. It really sucks. And when you work with people who aren't as well known, it's definitely more relaxed. You can still be I still remember it being very stressful when I was younger and less experienced. But as you get more experienced, that stress goes down in sessions, kind of when you know what you're doing. But yeah, I think attitude, like you can have some people who have never released a song and can't barely sing, and they'll have the worst attitude ever. And you can have a celebrity come in and they'll be the nicest person you've ever met. So, but generally speaking, that's not the case.
I see. Yeah,
I think celebrities are usually used to getting what they want pretty quickly, and if you don't deliver on that, they can be really nice, and then they'll get pretty angry pretty quickly. I
see. Right.
That's just my experience. So
I don't want to ask for any names when it comes to confrontations or so in the studio, but can you talk about some of the most enjoyable sessions you've had? Just where things just went better than usual. People you got along with really well. Yeah. Are you happy to drop some names?
There's been so many. Yeah, I don't want to drop names just to sound like I'm dropping names. I mean, I do a lot of work with Delta Goodrum. She's obviously one of my, she's become one of my closest friends, and I work with her pretty much every week, and I have worked with her for 3 years, and she's really lovely and down to earth, and we have a great working relationship. And I mean, when I first worked for her, I was really stressed, and I know that when she has to work with other people, they get really stressed working for her just because she's a celebrity. But she is really nice, and I know that, how she likes to be recorded, and she has a lot of trust in me, and it makes working with her is just like working with a friend. So it's always good recording her, and she's an amazing singer. She just does. It's one of the few people who just does full takes, and then you're kind of finished. Yeah. So she'll just do a few full takes. I mean, not always, but oftentimes she'll just do 3 or 4 takes, and it will make an easy little comp, and it'll be done.
Yep. Those are my preferred sessions, when the singers can do that. But that's not always the case, and it doesn't suit everybody, of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they've had some really awesome rap sessions. I think Kid Ink, he was really nice. We had a really good session. Sorry, I'm just drawing a blank. But I've done lots of cool stuff.
That's okay. Yeah. Say, and when you produce these days, is everything literally recorded in a studio, or is it like, I guess in most budget studios that musicians bring half the recordings from home? It was done on a DI box at home and record drums. Is it a blend of home recording and studio production, or is it all done in a studio?
Definitely more of a blend, I'd say. Okay. But then this last year, I've been doing recordings pretty much everywhere except for studios. I've been traveling a lot, and I recorded Delta on a cruise ship a couple of weeks ago. Delta sometimes doesn't like to come to the studio because she's busy, so we'll just record wherever she is, and that's a separate challenge and probably a separate conversation. But yeah, we'll stick a mic up, try to deaden the room and record. But I mean, I did a band the other day at 301, and they'd had a bunch of backing tracks finished, and they wanted to bring some live drums to the demo, and they brought a drummer in, and we recorded drums and some guitars there. So that's pretty common, I think. And then with mixing, a lot of people send you things that they've been produced, and they think, hey, if you're hearing anything, add something. I don't do a lot of production, but I'll add stuff if I think to a mix. If I always ask first and be like, hey, I think this could have better drums or something, that'll make it it'll help the mix be better if I add a drum that does this. And if you don't like it, just tell me, but I'll try it. And if they say yes, then I'll throw something in. And
so as an engineer who's used to working in the very best studios in the continent, working with recordings that were done at home, I guess that's a bit of a mixed bag. Some of it is probably pretty nice, but you probably also have to deal with relatively problematic stuff at times.
Yeah.
What are your most common problems that you find? What are people struggling with most when they record themselves at home?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, a big one, obviously vocal recording, because that's what most people do at home. And I encourage so many of my own clients to record themselves, because coming to a studio is expensive, it's stressful, and it's a lot of pressure. Like sometimes if you're not feeling the best and you've booked a studio, you have to perform, otherwise you're not going to come away. So I think everyone should learn to get Logic or Pro Tools or whatever, and you can get a pretty cheap mic these days and get a sound that's pretty good, if not really good. But the problems I see most people have is either doing too much processing yourself, trying to do too much, or just simple things like your room's not dead enough and you have a terrible reflection, and that's causing your microphone to have, a really early reflective sort of frequency spikes and things like that, or just roomy sounds, and or too close to the mic. Just people don't have some people don't have the ear to hear that they're. So if you're really close to the mic like that, you're just obviously going to get a lot of proximity effect, and even if you cut it all away, it's still, I don't know how to describe it, but I know exactly what you mean. You can't fully fix it later. You can make it and there's
better,
also just I think if you have a combination of a cheap condenser mic and a cheap interface, you get this really brittle sounding top end. Which, I mean, I shouldn't say this but I call it the Rode mic effect, because it's oftentimes, I don't want to hate on Rode mics, but it oftentimes is people have a Rode mic at a cheaper one at home. And I mean, I had a Rode K2, they make some good mics, but the cheaper ones, they have a very particular sounding top end. And when someone's recorded at home and you're trying to get a modern sounding pop sound and has a lot of brightness, if you push the brightness, it's harsh. And if you take away, it sounds dull. And there's no, I talk about this with some of my colleagues all the time. There's just, no matter what you do, it doesn't sound good. And it's not necessarily a Rode mic.
Exactly what you're talking about.
I call it the Rode mic effect, but that's a little harsh to Rode, I think. But I mean, some people, I think it's a combination of rooms and the mic and, everything. But
if I can share a trick that I use there, if that's the problem I'm facing with, and in particular if it's brighter female voices, that just makes it exponentially more brittle. But if I've got a brittle voice, I use Erk Sound's Soothe plugin.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
followed up by tape saturation.
Ah, okay, nice.
And between the two, it often sort of I find a compromise that I can live with that works in the mix.
Yeah,
but it's different every single time, so it doesn't always work. But
I think I have Soothe too on nearly every single channel of my.
You're right. Right.
On the highest setting.
Well, that's a lot.
It's
right.
Always at at ultra 4 times oversampling just to make me feel better. And it's even if a vocal is perfectly recorded, I think, well, why not just a little bit of Soothe? Just it can't hurt. But it's a really great plugin. And actually, people ask me like oftentimes, oh, what can I do to sort of combat that effect at home? And I'm like, well, I use this plugin, but I don't know if you want to spend that much money on that.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
Because I think if you used it too much, it actually does make things sound worse. It's like a multiband.
I think so too. Yeah, it's like a surgery knife, that thing. Yeah. So you can do a lot of damage with that as well as good. Yeah. And I really believe in getting it right in the first place wherever possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's definitely most important.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so let me just sum that up. So, the advice for musicians who record themselves at home, that's definitely look at your reflections and how the room sounds and don't capture too much. And I guess a good tip could be to just do a little test recording and then just literally put on headphones and crank it a bit louder for a moment and just listen to how much room you hear.
That's a really good tip.
A good test, I guess.
I reckon people don't listen back enough to their own recordings. So they might be focusing on their pitch or the delivery, which is normal for a vocal, but if you want someone to be able to make it sound really professional later, what's happening in the background is important, because as that gets compressed and made louder and all those little things are going to come up. And
I see.
It makes other things hard, like auto-tuning and stuff. If you have other noises and weird stuff, Melodyne and auto-tune is going to detect that, and it's going to do that little thing when it makes weird noises.
Which can be terrible, yeah. And then the second piece of advice was to... sorry, let me just collect my thoughts, was to, work with the best microphone available, and that's not necessarily the $150 condenser. So maybe, to our listeners who produce themselves at home, if you do something critical, maybe just ask around, borrow a better microphone of a mate.
Yep.
Or maybe even go to a local studio if they've got something decent. But
you can rent U87s for like $50 a day or something.
Really?
But also,
not where I live, unfortunately.
Okay. Someone might have one. Nice. You might know someone who has one and you can rent it. But I've literally heard a Neumann U47, a vintage one, and shot it out with an SM7, and the SM7 won. So, and that's happened not just to me, but other people I know. So, just because the mic's more expensive doesn't mean that it's better. And
it also depends on the voice that you record. Look, the SM7 is a phenomenal microphone. I've got one in my studio and gets a lot of use. And I've had quite a few situations where I had a drummer and bass player in one live room, and a guitar player in another live room, and percussions in another, and then a piano player, and then the vocalist was literally in the control room playing guitar into a DI box, singing into an SM7, which was meant to be a guide tag, but it sounded good enough, and we just said, wow, there's a certain magic in the moment. The spirit of the recording was right, and we used it. So, and it's in the recording.
That's awesome.
So why not? The SM7 is legendary. It's been used on many recordings, many professional recordings like Metallica, Michael Jackson, and we could keep on going. Phenomenal mic,
and it's going to pick up less room sound if you're recording at home too, which is really
exactly. And pretty much that's the reason why I set it up in the control room, so that I wouldn't capture people talking and breathing and so on. Yeah, nice. That's some really good advice, Tom. That's some really good advice. So, look, let's go back to other things that musicians can learn from your experience. And musicianship is of course one thing, but what about preparing instruments for recording session? Have you come across anything you want to suggest to our listeners to prepare themselves for a recording session, to get the most out of it?
That's such a good point. I think it's such an valued part of the process. The most important thing, as you know, and most engineers know, is the what you're recording. If you have a guitar that's out of tune, it doesn't matter if you use the best stuff; it's going to be out of tune later when you record it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, don't be afraid to get your guitars set up by a professional. It sounds so much better. I mean, I just took my bass the other day to someone in Sydney, and you sometimes even forget how good it can sound when it's been properly set up. If you do that before you record, you're already 90% of the way there to having a better sound than most people. And that's going to make your engineer super happy. And I mean, it's weird. Engineers it's like we're fighting to get sometimes musicians to, tune the guitar or change the strings so that we can get a better, but actually as a musician, it's your sound that you should want to be the best that it can be. So you should come with, fresh strings, or if that's the sound you want, and make sure your intonation's sorted out if you have a guitar. And for drums, I think it's unbelievable to me how many times people have old skins on their drum kit and they want to sound like a modern band. And it's like, but the skins are barely hanging in there. And I mean, if you hear the sound of freshly changed drum skins, it's night and day difference.
It's
just
no EQ in the world can make up the difference.
It's the same with any guitar strings. And I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but the best thing to do is have a drum tech. I mean, I haven't been in many sessions where that's happened, but I know, like, if you do a big session in America, there's the drum doctor. I know Delta did one, her last album. She went to Sunset Sound or one of those big studios, and they just spent 4 days just getting the drums to sound perfect. And it's like
4 days. Whoa.
I think something like that. I could be exaggerating.
Oh, gee.
I wasn't there, but they had 20 drum kits or however many, and they had them all tuned and ready to go. So it's like, this song, we want more of this kind of sound. So we'll use it. And it's almost, because I always say to my friends and colleagues, we all put the mics kind of in the same place. Let's just take drums or guitars. Like if it's a guitar amp, you're putting the mic pretty much in front of the cone. Or if it's a drum kit, you're kind of putting overheads up and mic on the snare, mic on the kick. I mean, everyone does something slightly different, but there's a general, we all kind of do the same. The difference is between a good sound and a bad sound is what the instrument and the playing sounds like. So, I mean, if you have those things taken care of, you just have to put the mics up. You have to put the mics up kind of where everybody else does it. And you've already got a better sound than most people. And then, put a couple weird things around to make it interesting. Put a guitar pedal on a drum kit or something and make it sound crunchy. But, that to me is when there's session drummers who are really good at tuning, and when they come in, it's going to be a good day. And some of the best drummers in the world can't tune their drums, and even though they play amazingly, they don't record well because the kit doesn't sound good. So, I think, being prepared for your session is super important. Obviously, knowing what you're playing to save time is also really important, but you'd be surprised how many people don't know what they're doing before they come to a session, even at 301, which is on the expensive side, or they haven't practiced. They just assume they're going to show up and kill it, and then they realize, wait, I have no idea what I'm doing, and before you know it, 8 hours flies by, and you've just wasted thousands of dollars. And I don't like that either. I feel terrible. I don't know why. I feel really guilty. So I have sometimes stopped people and said, hey, you're not ready. I'm going to stop the session now, and you can have 6 hours credit. Come back when you've practiced. Because I don't want to sit there for 6 more hours and watch you struggle and then beat yourself up after because you didn't do a good job. And then waste your money. I also feel guilty because it's a team. Whoever you're recording and it's a team effort to get
that's a difficult conversation to have. Yeah,
it is difficult, but it's better than
I guess
the pain later.
Being honest there actually serves the musicians best if that's what needs to be said. But does that happen often that people arrive unprepared?
Not very often. But it does. But it does happen. And it's interesting that you brought up the preparation thing. I do think it's really important, and it doesn't get talked about very much. So, I think it's a really good point. Yeah.
And maybe one of the last questions, but you've worked with so many people, very experienced, but also, I guess, some younger musicians. Did you find any common, let me call it, character traits that all the successful people have? Is there anything that you can point your finger at? Any work ethics or demeanors that makes successful musicians, or that they have in common?
I think most people who are very successful have a really strong work ethic, and they also have a lot of confidence in themselves. Even if that confidence is somewhat misplaced, confidence is still, if you don't back yourself in a recording studio, you're not going to deliver a performance that's convincing to people that, you can hear when someone's kind of nervous and a little shaky. So I think people who are really successful, I mean, success breeds confidence. So it's easier for people who are already successful to be confident.
Yeah.
But, I think if you look at newer artists, the people who I feel do better in studio situations already have the confidence of someone who's really successessLike they don't even think that they're new. But it's not arrogance. It's just like I'm really confident in what I'm doing. I have talent, I have skill, and I'm gonna kill it today. And then they go and just deliver, and it's and that gives you the best takes.
That's a great attitude to have. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great works to finish up on. If one of our listeners wants to find out more about you, maybe wants to book you for a session, where can we direct them to?
You can check out the 301 website. I'm really terrible at promoting myself. I have Instagram.
Of course,
I barely
going
post
to put
anything.
the link in the show notes, of course. Yeah. You're on Instagram as well?
I'm on
Would
Instagram,
you like me to put that in the show notes as well?
Yeah, sure, please. I'll share the podcast episode as well. And you can book me at Studio 301 website. But if you haven't, I always say if people have questions about anything, they can message me on Instagram. I mean, I don't do master classes or do these teaching things, but because I always say, if you have a question, just ask me. I mean, if you want me to listen to your song, I'll listen to it if I have time.
That's a really nice
I love
offer.
It's hopefully I can learn something as well. So
love it. That's a great attitude to have. Tom, thank you so much for speaking to me today and for sharing all your wisdom. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
It's really my pleasure, Jan. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you again.
Awesome to speak to you. Cheers, mate.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wow, this was Mr. Tom Garnett of Studios 301 on the Production Talk podcast. Thank you, Tom. I really enjoyed this chat. It's so good to see you again, mate. Also, this is the last episode of the year 2022. Next time I speak to you will be in 2023. So I hope you all have a fantastic new year. Hopefully this will be a better year for everyone who listens to the podcast. If you want to find out more about Tom and what he offers at Studio 301 in Sydney, go to the show notes, scroll down, and all the links are there to social profiles and, of course, to Tom's webpage on the Studios 301 website. However, if you want to reach out to me, you can, of course, do so via my website mixartist.com.au, where I offer mixdown services for everybody worldwide who needs a little bit of help getting their mix across the finish line. And of course, we also offer amazing studio recording services in the Northern Rivers in the Byron Shire. So if you have any projects coming up for the next year and you're based in this area, if you need to record, please reach out to me. There's a contact form on my website and I would love to hear from you. And that's all for this year. You have a fantastic time. I shall speak to you on the other side. Bye for now.